Welcome to the Mobile Workforce Podcast, where we sit down and have real conversations with business leaders that have been where you are. During these interviews, we'll dive into what it takes to improve systems and champion processes that maximize performance. Each week, our trailblazing guests share their experiences and understanding of the workforce to help inspire change, challenge our thinking, and share what it takes to successfully travel the road to profitability. Now here's our host, co-founder and chief evangelist of About Time and WorkMax, Mike Merrill.
Hello and welcome to the Mobile Workforce Podcast. I am your host, Mike Merrill, and today we are sitting down to record a very special two-part series with a good friend of ours, Jimmy, who works for a very large subcontractor construction company and is the IT director. In today's episode, we're going to talk about Jimmy's personal experiences in dealing with this ransomware attack that happened to his company and their system, and also show that no one is immune from these sorts of attacks. And also what happens afterwards and what type of information and what these companies are trying to accomplish by putting these attacks on businesses like yours. So thanks, Jimmy, for joining us on the show today. Looking forward to the conversation.
Glad to be here. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
So first off, Jimmy, why don't you tell us in general terms how technology is generally viewed within your subcontractor firm?
Well, Mike, it is severely taken for granted. And the way I put it to people that ask me that same question is it's kind of like a mom. She's always needed but never noticed until she's not there.
Oh, wow.
That's the best way to put it. I mean, it really is, and that's how a lot of construction companies are. We're worried about getting buildings built, right? And that's the main goal. At the end of the day, you still have to protect your data.
Yeah, that's interesting. As a former contractor myself, I can absolutely relate. I think technology in general gets taken for granted. And I know I've heard companies say things like, we're a construction company. Why does anybody need my data, right? Is that something you've heard commonly? And how has that played into this situation at your business?
Well, I've heard that comment quite a bit here, and so my answer to that is they don't care about what type of company we are. They don't care if you're selling ant food. They just want to encrypt your data. And once they encrypt your data, then it's going to be very devastating to try and come back.
So by encrypt, can you explain that just for the listeners, for anybody that maybe doesn't understand what that means or how that comes into play?
So what they do is they're able to get in and run a program on your systems against every file that you have on your systems, right? File servers, your email servers, and what that program will do, it'll wrap the file, okay? Basically put it in prison, and you got to have a special key to get out of prison.
Wow.
Only way to get that key is you pay a ransom, or you have company backups that you can restore from.
Got it. So can you tell us what happened to your system and how you guys were attacked?
So they came in, these threat actors came in through a Microsoft vulnerability, and that was through Outlook Web Access. And so our servers were patched with security updates, but there's always a vulnerability somewhere, right? And these threat actors look for those vulnerabilities. Well, they exposed this one, and they're able to get in, and they staged on one of our servers, and they didn't deploy right away. They kind of just held out for a while. They might have been, hopping around from server to server, looking around, see what they're doing, what they can do, what they can get a hold of. So they deployed, I believe, 15 hours later.
Wow.
Yeah, so once they deployed that, I received a text early one morning, and I saw the text, and I knew what it was right away. And so that's kind of when all hell broke loose.
So when you say you knew what that was right away, have you been to courses about this? Is this just personal study that you've done just in your trade to keep up with what's going on around? How did you know what that was immediately?
So both personal and from a business standpoint, we got hit in the past.
Okay.
when ransomware was early in its making, if you will. And so back then, I knew that we had to prepare for an attack because it's going to happen. People think, we go back to what do they want with my company? It doesn't matter. It's going to happen to you eventually. I mean, if you read the news articles, whatnot about security, just in everyday news, you see ransomware attacks everywhere. It's going to happen to you. And so, our first attack, I had to prepare for it. I knew what happened, and so that's kind of where it's been in my mind for a long time, preparing for an attack.
Like when you hear of, somebody down the street always has this thing happen to them, but it never happens to me. And I think it's common that people just have that attitude, like, it's not going to happen to me. What would you tell people that think that way?
Well, it's kind of like a heart attack. You hear about a heart attack all the time, but it's not going to happen to me. But guess what? When it happens, what do you do after the fact? Change your diet. You start running the treadmill. You're seeing your doctor every 6 months. You're putting all the measures in place to keep yourself healthy and from it happening again.
Wow. Yeah, that's that hits home. I think most of us know people maybe close to us. Maybe some of the listeners have had a heart attack. So it's a great analogy. So when you talked earlier about, you guys had got hit in the past, what did you do differently to prepare? I mean, you mentioned preparation, but what does that look like?
So the first time we were hit, we didn't have any endpoint protection. And that hit came in via an attachment through email, right?
Okay.
And it goes back to, IT budgets for construction companies, It's just, there's not a lot of sense of urgency put into an IT budget, especially security, right? So since the first attack, I knew we had to have endpoint protection. So we were able to get a product that could protect us from an endpoint standpoint. Does that make sense?
Uh-huh.
And so that was one of my first security measures I put in place after that first attack.
So then you put that in place. I mean, honestly, in your mind, did the culture of the company change much? Did people's attitude towards this change much? And if so, how much? And what were the limits?
Well, it did. It did change the mindset of, hey, I don't want to be the one that clicks on that email attachment and we get infected, right? Back then, it was just one person that got affected. Okay. But that quickly went away.
Uh-huh.
It's like anything else in life. Once you get hit side of the head with a 2x4, that pain goes away, the bruising goes away, and, life starts again, right? You always kind of remember it, but it's not, the sense of urgency isn't there. So that's where we have to, as IT professionals, we have to keep that sense of urgency going. So we have to protect the company's data.
Okay. So now fast forward. So you get hit, you learn from it, you move on in a better direction. You kind of get, just like the heart attack analogy, you trim up, you fix your diet, you lose some weight, you start exercising, but then you go back to a little bit kind of normal, how it was before a little bit. And tell us about that. The next 7 years, then what happened?
So as time goes on, you hear more and more ransomware attacks, companies that they're hitting, industries they're hitting. So it kind of gives you a sense of, oh my gosh, what am I doing? What am I not doing, right? Mm. And so I had a good friend as a consultant. We'd always bounce ideas off each other as far as security, company backups, this and that.
Fun stuff.
Fun IT stuff, right?
Right.
And so knowing where the trend was going with ransomware, I knew that we had to do something from a securing our company backups, because you don't have your company data, then it's going to be very hard to recover. Because you hear companies all the time getting hit, paying ransom, they got to start all over again, right? Mm-hmm. So long and short of it, had a plan of attack in place, no pun. And I talked to a few executives here. I wanted to have an infrastructure that was isolated from my main network. So in the event that we did get breached, compromised, they wouldn't be able to see that backup infrastructure, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
That idea got shot down twice.
Wow.
It goes back to budgeting, and again, we're a construction company. We don't, what do they need our data for, right? And so I know the owner very well, and I have the company's best interest at heart. And he told me when he first hired me, treat it like it's yours. I've never forgotten that. So what I did was I made a decision to go ahead and build a backup infrastructure against what he said, because I knew that we were going to get hit, and the size that we are would be a major, major impact to our company. So I called a friend of mine, said, hey, I know there's a server over there. Is it still sitting there? He's like, yep. I said, all right, I'm going to buy some drives. Nothing high performance, just some dump truck drives. Or I just want to set some data, right? I want to just back up and throw data over there. So in the event when we get hit, we're protected. So we did that. And he had a backup company. And so we installed software to back up to our location, and everything was working great, right? And his software was a test software, because he wanted to roll out to his customers. And so we got the software free for many, many years, and so it didn't cost us anything. And then so we were protected from that standpoint. You couldn't see that backup infrastructure. It was actually located physically in a different part of the property. So that was a good thing as well. So it was on-prem, but still far enough away, we were protected. And then so it was behind its own subnet where nobody could see it if they were to get in.
Okay, so you really you did a good job to really hide this thing and put it in a place where it wasn't connected, right?
Yeah, it goes back to the owner telling me to treat it like it's mine. And so I wanted to make sure that nobody could see it. Like, you would have to be really, really, really good to be able to see it behind all the security measures we put in place. So I think we did a pretty good job of it.
Yeah, and you couldn't get the budget approval for the system you thought you needed, and so you cobbled together what you could for a minimal budget, and then found a way to pay for that just to keep them protected.
Yes, sir. It's exactly what I did. It's exactly what I did.
That's fantastic. I think that's got to be the exception to the rule in most cases, right?
I would think so. I'm not proud of that, because he did say, he did deny it, but I knew that the impact would be greater than that answer to me. I just, like I said, I know him very well. He's a great guy, and I had to do that for him and the company.
So now you've got these drives in place, these dump truck drives, as you call them. I like that term. But something heavy and not fast, but can.
We can haul the freight.
There you go. Awesome. So you did that. Then you get attacked. You saw this. You see what's going on here. You see this text. What goes through your mind, and what happened after that?
So I knew we were hit. Made some phone calls on the way to the office to some security guys that I've known for many, many years. I get to the office, and we start shutting down network cards on the servers. Okay, looking at how bad the damage is, and we were pretty much fully encrypted. And of course, I'm thinking, how in the heck did they get in? When somebody infiltrates your network, you take it personal. It's like somebody breaking into your house. You take it very, very personal. Yeah, and so we were completely encrypted, and so we had a meeting of all the executives some cybersecurity guys. We had some attorneys on the line. And the owner turned to me and asked, so what are we going to do? Because we knew how much the ransom was, and it was in the millions. I looked at him and I said, do you remember when you told me not to build that backup infrastructure? And he kind of shook his head. And I looked at him and I said, I built it anyways. And the room was quiet.
Wow.
And I said, we're not going to do anything. We've verified that our backups have not been compromised. As soon as we get out of this meeting, we're going to start restoring data to our servers. And the servers that we're going to restore to, that same guy I got my server from on the shelf. He had some hardware laying around, so we had a temporary infrastructure where we can restore all of our data to. So we started restoring data. So that was pretty amazing, starting the restore process from that backup infrastructure to our new temporary server, if you will. And we actually did payroll a day later.
Wow.
Yeah, a day later.
Truly amazing. And as we both know, and I think the listeners can relate, you don't make payroll, you got problems if you're running a construction company.
No, you lose people if you don't pay them.
Yeah.
They're going to leave real quick.
Yeah. Wow.
I will add to the story.
Okay.
So we were able to make payroll. We were bringing servers up. Everything is just rolling like it should, and we're excited, anticipating what's going to happen the next week and this and that. I get a call from my consulting buddy a few days later. He says, "Hey, we have a problem."
Uh-oh.
And it was late. I was like, okay. So I met him at our backup location. We had 2 of those drives fail in that backup server. Yeah. So you remember when I said they were dump truck drives? They're just going to hold data.
Right.
What I never thought was in the disaster recovery plan, your DR plan, is will those drives haul the freight going the other way, restoring? Well, they couldn't haul the freight. So I lost 2 drives. We were 99.999% almost back up.
Wow.
Yeah. So I had to call 8 different data recovery places the next day. We were down 10 days trying to get our data recovered from those 2 failed hard drives. And Mike, you know as well as I do, when you have failed hard drives, you get corrupted data.
Yep.
And so after that 10 days were up, we knew that we had lost about a week's worth of data from the data recovery. So hindsight, there are a lot of things you go back and look at. Okay, I did this wrong, did that wrong, did this right, did that wrong. And so you make your list of, I need to mitigate these things. So high performance drives on a backup server, highly recommended.
Yeah, great to know. And again, just the image, when you say dump truck drive, I get what that must mean. And that is very interesting that it wouldn't haul the freight back the other way. It burned up the motor right before it got across the line.
Pretty much, because we were blowing and going, moving 2 and 3 servers, but just really never. I mean, I've been in this business for over 20 years and just never thought about. IT guys always say, you're never going to lose 2 drives. Yeah, you will.
Huh.
If it's going to happen, it's going to happen in a dire situation. So I always try and prepare with the mindset of 1 is none, 2 is 1. So.
Yeah. So if you've only got 1 backup, then you've only got 1 instance, right? the way you got to treat
You
it.
only have one backup, you only have one backup. And if that one doesn't work on a restore, what do you do? Because my job is to protect the company data. And since then, we put things in place to mitigate that. One is none, two is one.
So now, having gone through that, looking back, 7 years or whatever it was before with your prior attack, which doesn't sound like it was nearly as severe or problematic, what what has the company culture uh, done to adjust, and how has that changed from what it used to be and what it will be going forward?
It's a complete 180.
Mm.
I mean, even this long after the incident, it's still a 180. Like the executive staff, I mean, 100% on board. Controls and policies that I present to them, they are fully on board. They get the impact. We were down 10 days. The size of company that we are, when you're down 10 days, that's huge. That's very impactful. I mean, what is a payroll? What is
Yeah,
your
right.
payroll for that 10 days? You have your company's down. You still got to pay people. I mean, that's very, very devastating. Can be very devastating for a company. And so, yes, their mindset is a complete 180. We have a lot of support. And as far as the controls we put in place, fully on board. And the owner is fully on board. I mean, he will remind people that work here of the controls. Our users, from a control standpoint, they question every email, every file. They will contact IT. They'll come get us. They are very, very aware and alert of anything that is suspicious on the network, which makes our job a whole lot easier, and that fends off a lot of potential threats.
Yeah, so they're vigilant now, it sounds like, versus passive.
Very vigilant. And and sometimes, you know, I could see other companies where it could possibly irritate IT staff. Not here. Myself and my team, we appreciate the users that stop what they're doing because they're stopping their job, right? They could very easily say, "No, I'm just keep going with this," but they take time out to make sure that this attachment is okay or this file is okay. And as an IT professional, from a security standpoint, you can't ask for anything better than that.
Well, so from a cultural standpoint, awareness standpoint, I mean, it just sounds like all the way from the field guys, the users in the office, to the owner and the executive team, everybody is taking this super seriously because they realize what those potential costs could have been.
Yes. Oh yeah. Well, they could have been. And I always say this: security is uncomfortable, but it sure is comforting.
Hmm. That's great. So what do you, I mean, how would you sum that up to your boss if he was to say, are we going to, let's say it was millions of dollars, and you didn't have the backup? What are you going to advise him, and then what still could potentially happen?
So I advise: remember when I asked you twice, we need to build this back up? This is why.
Okay. And then after that, I mean, if he was going to evaluate what this is going to cost him paying a ransom versus what it could cost him if he doesn't, and you're just out, what do those extremes look like? You share any examples?
That's a conversation you do not want to have. But if that conversation comes up and your IT director is telling you you need to build a backup infrastructure and it doesn't happen and you have no data, then if you have paper copies of invoices, customer data, job plans, that's all going to have to be scanned in, somehow manually entered into systems that you have to purchase, right? Hardware you got to purchase, new software you have to purchase. And how long is it going to take to get all that data back into systems to where you're just barely functional. And if you're doing, let's just say you're doing weekly payroll or biweekly payroll in-house, how many people do you lose in the field? What does that cost you? That's astronomical for the company. And I'll be honest with you right now, with the supply chain problem, trying to get hardware, good luck. If you try and buy a Cisco product right now, a Cisco switch, you're waiting 9.5 months. 9.5 months.
Sounds to me like this kind of thing could easily put almost anybody out of business. Is that what you think?
There are a lot of companies you hear about going out of business because they don't have backups. They pay a ransom. 92% of companies, I just read this last week on Forbes, 92% of companies that pay a ransom do not get their data back. So the moral of the story is spend the money, get a good backup infrastructure that nobody can see, and back up. And I'm telling you right now, these CEOs, CFOs, presidents of companies, you need to be asking your IT director, IT manager, or whoever it is, when's the last time we had a 100% full, complete backup that was successful?
So, Jimmy, this has been fascinating and fantastic. I know that the listeners are going to find value in this if they haven't been having to deal with something like this directly. Let's pray that they prepare for the day that should they have to have these tough conversations, that they're in a better place, like you were, because of the choices you made. Is there any final thoughts before we end this one and maybe start on another episode talking about how companies can plan to get ahead of this? Any closing thoughts you'd like to leave with the listeners?
I'll just say this. You can't take security for granted. Once you do that, it will be devastating to your company at some point in time.
Yeah, believe that. Well, thanks again, Jimmy. Appreciate your time today and look forward to having our next conversation.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us today on the Mobile Workforce Podcast, sponsored by About Time Technologies and WorkMax. If you liked the conversation we had today or were able to learn anything new or helpful, please make sure to follow us on our WorkMax page on LinkedIn and on Instagram at WorkMax_. And subscribe to the show on iTunes or your preferred podcast platform so you will never miss another insightful episode. Also, if you enjoyed the podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating and review and share the show with your friends and colleagues. Your support means the world to us and will allow us to continue providing impactful information with others looking to improve their results in their business and, in turn, their life.